fellow cheapskates and mountain bike nerds. Today I'm going to give you a rundown of what I think of my Propain Tyee. I mostly love it. There are a couple things I would like to change if I could, and I'll try to give some thoughts about it that will help you decide if this is the bike for you. So let's get into it.
Okay, brace yourself for some helpful insights and mediocre riding footage. Let's start with the setup. It was pretty easy to put together out of the box. It was well packed. You can see another video I made about the unpacking linked below. The only problem with that was there was no torque wrench, so make sure you have one of those. And the fork had a pretty bad scratch on it. I still haven't heard back from them about that. I did switch out a bunch of the components to make them to my preference and save some money. Also a video about that linked below. I should note that the 210mm 1-up dropper post has no problem fitting. Lots of clearance for that for you taller riders. Mostly the frame seems really well built and engineered and thought out. It's a work of art, and it uses their special carbon layup technology that makes it stronger and stiffer in some places where that's needed, and vice versa. One problem that some reviewers have noticed, and I agree with, is the cables. They do rattle inside the frame sometimes, which you can hear right here. And the way they route them under the bottom bracket is a little suspect. I haven't torn out one of those cables yet, but after every ride, or even during the ride, I'll notice that they're sticking pretty far down, and it seems like they could get whacked by a rock or have a stick get caught in there. So I'd like to figure out a solution for that, but haven't really gotten into that yet. It took me some fiddling to get the suspension feeling good. As other reviews have noted, it's a pretty harsh feeling back end. That's why a lot of people are putting coil shocks on. And I have the air shock on mine. At first, it was definitely on the harsh side on the back end, really poppy, and I didn't really feel like I was using all the travel. So I took out a volume spacer and have the sag set at just over 30%, which definitely seems to help. And you can see my suspension settings here. The lyric on the front was also a little on the harsh side for me. I was coming from the last generation lyric, the RC2, and that fork had even plusher small bump sensitivity, which I kind of missed. The new lyric, they quote unquote solved the problem of too much negative pressure, and the result of that is a more supportive fork, but I was definitely feeling it in my hands more. So now I have a runt in there from DSD, and that thing is great. It gives that plush small bump sensitivity in the beginning of the stroke that we all love, but then it still is supportive in the mid-stroke and ramps up nicely without being harsh. So I kind of feel like I'm having my cake and eating it too, with the lyric with the runt in it. The other source of harshness I felt was from the Schwalbe Magic Mary tires. They were 0.23 width, and I don't even remember what the casing was, but they just didn't feel very nicely damped, and I put on my tires from my last bike, an Onza Aquila in the rear, and a Maxxis Assegai in the front, and that definitely provided some more grip and some nice damping. Also, I have a nuke-proof ARD tire insert in the rear, which probably adds to a bit of that nicely damped feel from the tires. One interesting thing about this bike is there's no adjustment. That's kind of becoming more and more common these days. Most bikes, it seems, at least have a flip chip, and this bike, you just keep that geometry out of the box unless you want to go to the length of putting in a headset angle adjustment or something like that. For a bike with 160 millimeters of rear travel and 170 up front, this thing climbs really well. My last bike was a Rocky Mountain Instinct, and it started as a 140 front and rear bike, and then I upped it to 155 and 160 in the front. And this bike climbs, I would say, better than that. And I think it's down to the firm suspension, the high anti-squat values, and the longer chainstay in the back. You know, people talk about the long chainstays giving stability and, feeling great in the corners, but it really helps, especially if you're tall, on the climbs, because your weight is more centered. It's easier to keep that front wheel on the ground, and the weight and traction in the rear wheel. Also, the steep seat tube definitely helps, especially, again, being a taller rider. When us tall riders put that seat all the way up, if that seat tube isn't steep enough, your weight really gets over the back wheel. But on this bike, that's not really a problem. So again, just helps with keeping the weight balanced on the climbs. The RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate does have a climb switch, and about the only time I feel like it's worth reaching down to flip it is on a fire road or some sort of road climb. So yeah, the anti-squat is pretty helpful, and there's still enough traction even climbing some really techy stuff. And the bike doesn't feel big and long in switchbacks. It's easy enough to get it around tight areas. And maybe this would be a time to say that it's not a very long bike. The XL has a reach of 491. I think the large is 471. A lot of bikes now in the XL or even sometimes the large sizes are getting over 500 millimeters. And I think that's when you're going to start feeling that boat-like quality on the climb. So most people are going to buy this bike for its descending capabilities, which are great. It's not a plow. If I was to buy a bike for racing, this would probably not be it. This one is more about having fun and turning any obstacle into a jump or, a feature. It's really sprightly. It's great in the corners. Those longer chainstays in the back at 445 millimeters, you really do feel that difference. That does come with a little bit of flex in the rear end. Those longer chainstays are going to be subject to some more leverage. I assume that's why you feel it flexing. And there is a little bit of that, but it's not a problem. I read one review that said there was a knock sometimes in hard corners. I probably just don't corner hard enough for that to happen, but I haven't noticed any kind of noise in corners from a rear end flex. And having those longer chainstays doesn't mean that the bike is cumbersome or slow around corners or anything like that. It's, like I said, very sprightly. It jumps great. I've actually been overshooting a lot of my regular jumps on my local trails. So to sum up on the descending, it's more a bike to skim over and hop over stuff than to just plow through it. So if you're looking for a fun, poppy, lively bike, this is great for that. If you're looking for more of a enduro race plow, probably look elsewhere. Now that's all with the air shock. Again, that's a RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate in the back. And that might change with a coil. I'm guessing a coil will feel more planted and, maybe a little more like a plow. So I would like to try a coil at some point, probably in the spring when things thaw out here. And when that happens, I'll probably do a video on that and give my thoughts on that. But there is a lot of talk out there about coil versus air on this bike. It's not like you're going to be disappointed with the air shock in the back, but know that with that kind of shock, it's definitely on the more peppy, playful side and not the racy, plowy side. So all in all, I love this bike for the kind of riding I do, which is a lot of aggressive trail riding. It's really fun. It's really fun on the descents, and it climbs well to get to them. If I'm on a ride that's more rolling or flat, it still pedals well enough and isn't too much of a handful. If I was prioritizing racing, I probably would have gotten more of a thoroughbred race bike, which this bike, at least with an air shock, is not. And the bike is a pretty good value. In the US, the value is not nearly as good as what it is in Europe if you do that math. If I was in Europe, I would buy this bike for sure. In the US, you can take a look at their website, but the prices are a little cheaper than what you get buying from your local bike shop. But if you really value having someone set up the bike for you and having that point of contact, you might want to think about that, because you're not saving that much money by going with Propain in the US. Part of the reason I got this bike is because it's just really hard to find a bike right now, especially a new one with the pandemic happening. And I think I got one of the last of these in my size in the US. So no regrets. I'm loving it. And to sum up, here is a list of the positive and negative attributes, along with some more of my somewhat okay riding. Enjoy, and feel free to ask questions in the comments. Thanks, everybody.